Welcome back, night crawlers, to Nakora Nights. New Year's Eve is supposed to be about celebration, fireworks, countdown, fresh beginnings. But in Canada, when the snow falls heavy and the night stretches on forever, some New Year's Eves don't end with cheers. They end in silence. Tonight, we're uncovering 10 true Canadian New Year's Eve horror stories. Real encounters that happened on the coldest night of the year, a countdown that stopped at 11 and never reached midnight, footprints in fresh snow that led nowhere, and a knock on the door at 12 sharp when no one should have been outside. These aren't campfire tales. They're stories from people who were just trying to celebrate until the night turned against them. Before the clock strikes, tell me, where are you watching from right now? And what time is it where you are? Because if it's close to midnight, this video might feel a little too real. If you're ready to step into the cold darkness, hit like, subscribe, and comment below. I made it past midnight. Now, turn the volume up, keep the lights low, and when the countdown begins, listen closely. This is 10 Untold Most Disturbing True Canadian New Year's Eve Horror Stories. Let's begin. I never thought one night could change the way I look at people, but that New Year's Eve in Toronto taught me how thin the line is between ordinary life and real terror. I had always felt uneasy around crowds, but nothing prepared me for what happened after midnight. My name is Rayhan, and before this night, I was the kind of person who tried to stay invisible, someone who pretended he had everything under control even when he didn't. I grew up in Scarborough, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at a care home, and from a young age I learned to stay out of trouble, to avoid anyone angry or unpredictable. Maybe that is why people always called me the careful one, the quiet one, the friend who plans everything but still panics inside when something unexpected happens. That year, life had already hit me hard. I had just ended a long relationship with someone I thought I would marry. December felt like a month of empty rooms, long nights, and trying not to think too much. My friends saw it, especially Sana, who had been part of my circle since college. She refused to let me spend New Year's Eve alone. She and her boyfriend Calvin, along with my coworker Lucas, practically dragged me out of my apartment near Kennedy Station. They said fresh air would help. I didn't believe them, but I let them pull me along anyway. We took a ride share toward the waterfront to watch the fireworks. The city felt heavy with cold, the kind of cold that bit straight through your jacket, but the lights on the CN Tower and the holiday decorations along Queen's Quay made everything feel alive. Toronto always looked different on New Year's Eve, like it was trying to pretend it wasn't tired or worn down by the long winter. We ate street food near Harborfront, listened to street musicians playing loud enough to drown out our thoughts, and counted down with thousands of strangers. For a moment, I thought maybe the night would be okay. I was wrong. When the fireworks ended around 1:27 a.m., we tried to get a ride home before the surge pricing got worse. My friends joked about heading to a diner, but the wind cut through us so fast we hurried into an Uber share to avoid freezing. The driver, a quiet middle-aged man named Mateo, had a little Colombian flag hanging from his rearview mirror, and he played soft Latin music like he didn't want to disturb anyone. There were already 2 people in the van, a young couple who looked more tired than awake. The girl was slumped against the window, glitter stuck to her cheek like she had walked through a cloud of it. We pulled away from the downtown crowds and drove toward the quieter suburbs north of the city. The streets looked deserted, the snowbanks frozen in long, uneven lines, Christmas lights blinking behind dark windows as if forgotten. Toronto felt emptied out, like everyone had gone somewhere else to celebrate. That was when little things started happening, the kind you notice without understanding. The first thing was when the rideshare dropped off the couple near Yonge Street. We expected the van doors to unlock when we reached their stop. Instead, the locks clicked shut again. Mateo frowned, tapping his screen. The countdown to midnight had ended long ago, yet the car acted like it wasn't allowed to release its passengers. For a moment, the couple panicked, pulling at the handle. The girl started to whimper, confused and half asleep. Then, suddenly, the locks released on their own with a sharp snap. They stumbled out into the cold, and the van pulled away before any of us could comment. We didn't know it yet, but that was the first clue that something was wrong. Not long after, we passed a tall condo tower as we drove north. Fireworks cracked in the distance, echoing off the buildings. For a second, I heard shouting through an open balcony door on the 21st floor. A man's angry roar, a woman pleading. The sound was so sharp it cut through the night. I turned toward Mateo. "Did no one hear that?" I asked. He kept his eyes on the road, knuckles tightening on the wheel. "Fireworks cover everything right now," he muttered, like he had heard things he didn't want to hear. Then his GPS directed him through a residential neighborhood I didn't recognize. The houses stood still, cold, dark. The snow on the lawns looked untouched. Lights flickered inside empty rooms behind drawn curtains. The streets felt like they were holding their breath. We stopped at a red light near a four-way intersection around 2:14 a.m., and that was when the night finally cracked open. A dark sedan rolled to a stop beside us. The driver sat slightly ahead of us, and through the window I saw movement, sharp and ugly. At first, I thought they were arguing. The man's shoulders shook as he shouted. The woman beside him looked small, tired, pinned against the door. Then his hand came up, and he punched her with a full closed fist. Her head snapped sideways against the window with a sickening thud. Sana gasped so sharply she grabbed my wrist. Calvin leaned forward between the seats, trying to see. The man hit her again, this time grabbing a handful of her hair and smashing her head toward the dashboard. She didn't fight back. She didn't even raise her hands. Her body looked limp, defeated, like she had stopped trying a long time ago. Blood smeared across the passenger window, glistening under the streetlight. Mateo swore under his breath. His eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, wide and scared. Before anyone could think, Calvin slammed his palm onto the horn, holding it down until the sound tore through the silent street. The man in the sedan froze mid-swing, then slowly turned his head toward us. I will never forget his face. He wasn't wild or drunk or confused. His expression was flat, cold, like he was calculating something. He looked directly into our van, and for one horrible moment, it felt like the air turned to ice. The light turned green, but no one moved. We just stared at each other across a thin sheet of glass, trapped in a moment that felt wrong in every possible way. Then he lifted one finger, pointing straight at us. A slow, controlled gesture, like a promise. He turned right at the intersection and disappeared. Lucas was already calling emergency services, but there was a recorded message saying call volume was high due to the holiday. Mateo pressed on the gas, speeding forward out of pure instinct. I twisted around to stare out the back window. For a few seconds, the street behind us stayed empty. Then headlights swung around the corner too fast to be normal. It was him. He had circled the block. He was coming for us. Mateo accelerated, weaving through the empty residential streets. The sedan followed tightly behind, never gaining, never slowing, holding a perfect distance like a hunter. Calvin tried to take a photo of the license plate, but the darkness and motion made everything blur. Sana grabbed my arm, trembling so hard I could feel it through her jacket. The car behind us edged closer. Toronto's sleeping houses passed by in a blur, windows dark, porches empty, no one awake to see anything happening. We blew through a stop sign, then another. The sedan followed without hesitation. Mateo made a sudden right turn. For a moment, the headlights behind us disappeared, but when I looked again, they were already back. The sedan surged toward us, closing the distance in seconds. The glare of its headlights filled the van. I could see the man's silhouette behind the wheel, one hand steady, the other doing something I couldn't see. There was a strange calm in his posture, like he enjoyed this. Mateo swerved, but the sedan clipped the back of our van, sending us skidding sideways. I slammed into the seat in front of me. The couple in the back screamed. We regained control, but I saw a fresh dent in the sedan's bumper. And I saw the man laughing, real laughter. His shoulders shook, his mouth stretched wide, wild, delighted. Lucas finally reached a dispatcher. He spoke so fast the words tangled together, describing the sedan, the assault, the chase. The dispatcher kept saying to stay moving, stay on the line, units were coming, but response times were delayed. Delayed felt like the worst word I had ever heard. Mateo raced toward what he thought was a major road, hoping for traffic or lights or people. Anything. But the neighborhood stretched on and on, block after identical block. A sudden slam from behind jolted us. Something cracked under the car. Mateo cursed, fighting the steering as it pulled hard to the left. We limped through one last intersection before the van gave up, grinding to a stop in front of a dark house with a for sale sign. 3 blocks away, faint neon lights glowed above a gas station. Might as well have been a mile. The sedan rolled to a stop behind us. Its headlights lit up our interior like a spotlight, washing out our faces. No one breathed. The driver's door opened. The man stepped out. He was bigger than he looked in the car. Thick shoulders, heavy boots, head shaved clean. He walked slowly, his boots crunching on the frozen pavement. Each step echoed like a countdown. Lucas whispered our location to the dispatcher, voice shaking. Mateo reached under his seat and pulled out a tire iron. Calvin braced himself like he might jump out to help, though his hands shook violently. The man stopped a few feet from our bumper and stared at us, then reached into his jacket. My chest tightened, but instead of a weapon, he pulled out a cigarette. He lit it calmly, took a long drag, and watched us through the glass like we were trapped animals. He wanted us to know he was in control. Minutes crawled by. The street stayed utterly silent. When he finished, he flicked the cigarette to the ground, crushed it under his heel, and took slow, steady steps toward us. Mateo acted first. He threw open his door and stepped out with the tire iron. The cold air rushed in, carrying the sharp bite of fear. The man paused, eyes scanning him up and down. Then, faintly, sirens echoed from somewhere far away. The man heard them too. His posture shifted. He stepped back, then another step. He looked at each of us through the windows, one by one, as if memorizing our faces. Then he pointed again. The same slow finger from the intersection. He walked back to his sedan, slipped in smoothly, and drove away down a side street. By the time a police cruiser arrived, he was gone. We gave statements for nearly an hour. The sky turned light blue. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Later, the police told us they found the beaten woman at a hospital about 20 minutes after everything happened. She walked in alone, bleeding from a cut above her eye. She refused to give a name, refused to say who hurt her, refused to press charges. Without her help, nothing could be done. The man disappeared into Toronto's endless streets. Life went back to normal for the city. But not for me. For weeks, I replayed everything. The punch, the chase, and the laughter, that pointing finger. I checked news sites, hoping to see an arrest, hoping to know he wasn't out there anymore. But no story appeared, and every time I walked through Union Station after work, I found myself thinking about that night. One evening, I went into the station washroom and heard someone crying inside a locked stall, soft, broken sobs. I waited. The crying kept going. When I knocked, the sobbing stopped. I waited again. The stall never opened, and when I finally left the washroom, a cold thought crept up my spine. What if some people never escaped the person chasing them? What if he had found someone else? Sometimes, late at night, when the wind hits the windows just right, I imagine that sedan crawling slowly through some quiet Toronto neighborhood, headlights off, moving patiently, like it always did, waiting for someone to notice something they should have ignored. Waiting for someone to honk, waiting for someone like us. This story shows that when we see someone in danger, we should not ignore it, because our actions might save a life. It reminds us to trust our feelings when something feels wrong and to get help fast. We also learn that some people hide their pain, so we must stay aware and care about others. Most of all, the story teaches us to stay alert, stay brave, and speak up when something is not safe. I always thought courage was something a person discovered slowly, one moment at a time. But on that New Year's Eve in Vancouver, I learned that fear has its own way of choosing you, twisting the world around you until nothing feels safe anymore, not even your own heartbeat. My name is Marlo, and before that night, I worked as a junior technician repairing servers for a small office company near Granville Street. Nothing special, nothing heroic, just long hours and quiet days. Back then, I used to tell people that life was simple if you did not go looking for trouble. I guess trouble was looking for me. Every December, since graduating with my closest friends years ago, we had a tradition of gathering for New Year's Eve downtown, usually near Canada Place or by the harbor where the fireworks made the water shine like glass. It was the one thing we never skipped, no matter how chaotic life became. I would always get messages from my childhood friend Mason reminding me to mark the date, and I always said yes, because a small part of me believed traditions could protect us from the world. I was wrong. This time Mason texted me on the 27th of December asking if our crew was still meeting near the Vancouver Convention Center for the countdown. I said yes without thinking, because keeping the tradition alive felt comforting. On the 31st, 6 of us headed downtown, bundled in coats to fight the cold wind rolling off the harbor. Mason brought his girlfriend Rowan, our friend Caden arrived, with his older cousin Blake, and I invited Tamsin from my office who had moved to the city that summer. She had never experienced the chaos of a Vancouver New Year's crowd, and she smiled the entire time the SkyTrain rattled toward Waterfront Station. The air felt alive the moment we stepped out into the night. People everywhere, breath turning white in the freezing wind. Music boomed from nearby speakers, and the lights from the harbor flickered across thousands of faces waiting for midnight. We found a place near a food stall selling steaming bowls of noodles, close enough to see the stage where a band played rock covers that were mostly drowned out by the growing crowd noise. Everything should have felt safe, but crowds have a strange way of changing shape without warning, like a tide you cannot predict. By 11:30, the crowd had tripled. What used to be a comfortable gathering transformed into a wall of bodies pressing from every direction. I could feel strangers breathing against my neck, shoulders locking into mine, hands brushing too close. People pushed forward toward the stage, and our group struggled to stay together, gripping sleeves and elbows. But little by little, we were pulled apart. I lost sight of Mason first, then Rowan disappeared in the shifting sea of people. Caden and Blake vanished somewhere to my left when a wave of tourists surged forward. Tamsin squeezed my wrist and tried to yell something, but her voice drowned under layers of noise. A moment later, she was dragged sideways and her hand slipped away like melting ice. I reached for my phone, but the screen stayed black. I had forgotten to charge it before leaving home. The helplessness burned deeper than the cold. I needed air. I needed space. My chest felt tight from the crush of bodies and the heavy smell of perfume, sweat, and spilled drinks. I pushed sideways using my shoulders, inching through gaps, whispering apologies that no one heard. It took almost 10 minutes to move a few feet, squeezing past laughing couples and college kids blowing noisemakers into my ears. When I finally broke through the thickest part of the crowd, I found myself near the corner of West Cordova and Thurlow Street, close enough that I could breathe again. A narrow service alley cut between 2 old brick buildings, one with boarded windows covered in faded graffiti. I stepped into the alley just long enough to regain control of my lungs, leaning against the cold wall. The sound from the crowd softened behind me, muffled like someone had closed a heavy door. My watch read 11:58, 2 minutes before midnight, but I had no idea where my friends were. That was when the first firework exploded above the harbor, spraying red light across the alley and revealing something I had not seen in the dark. About 30 feet deeper into the shadows, 2 men in heavy jackets were dragging a woman toward a service door. She fought them, her heels scraping against the wet ground, her mouth stretched in a scream I could not hear. Another burst of fireworks lit the alley in green and white, and her face flashed clear to me, young, terrified, eyes wide as she twisted against their grip. One man pressed his hand hard over her mouth. The other held her by the arms so tightly, the silver fabric of her dress bunched under his fingers. For a moment, my body froze. My mind refused to believe what my eyes were seeing. Then I moved toward them before my thoughts caught up. My voice cracked through the cold air, something like telling them to stop or leave her alone, though I barely heard myself over the roar of fireworks. Both men turned toward me. The taller one, lean with a dark cap pulled low, looked annoyed like I had interrupted something important. He stepped forward slowly, eyes fixed on me. He reached into his jacket and pulled the zipper down just enough for me to see the open folding knife inside. He did not raise it, did not wave it, just showed it to me like a warning. "Wrong place, friend," his tone cold enough that my stomach tightened. "Turn around, go back to your celebration." Behind him, the shorter man kept the woman pinned. She stared at me, silent tears streaking her cheeks, begging without words. I thought of running back to find help, but the police had blocked off several side streets to control the crowd, and by the time I found someone, these men would be gone. She would be gone. The countdown started behind us, thousands of voices rising like a wave. 10, 9, 8. The tall man turned slightly, thinking I'd given up. That tiny motion changed everything. A metal trash can lid leaned beside a stack of recycling bins, and I grabbed it and swung hard. The lid hit the side of his head with a hollow crack that shot pain at my arms. He dropped sideways into a pile of crates, and the knife fell from his hand. I ran straight toward the shorter man, who reached for something inside his coat. The woman twisted and elbowed him in the ribs, buying just enough time to break free. She fell to her knees, scrambling toward me, her dress torn and hair wild. I pulled her to her feet and turned toward the street, but the tall man was already getting up. Blood ran down his face. He picked up the knife and blocked the way out. His expression had changed from annoyance to something cold and hungry. The woman clutched my arm so tightly her nails pierced my jacket. "Another way," she whispered through ragged breath. "I saw a gate at the back when they brought me in." I did not question her. The shorter man was already moving toward us. We ran deeper into the alley, dodging puddles and broken crates. Fireworks flashed above, lighting the narrow corridor in strobing bursts. We reached a small courtyard surrounded by the backs of closed cafes and shops. A chain-link fence stood at the far end, about 8 feet tall with barbed wire at the top. The woman pointed with shaking hands. "Climb it. You can climb it." I reached the gate first and tested it. It held firm. I cupped my hands together and told her to step up. She hesitated, eyes reflecting fear and something like hesitation, but then she placed her foot in my hands and I pushed her upward. She gripped the top, pulled herself over, leaving silver fabric caught on the barbed wire. She dropped to the other side with a painful grunt. I started climbing after her, fingers hooked through the cold metal. I was halfway up when a hand wrapped around my ankle and yanked me down. I hit the ground hard, breath knocked out, vision flashing white. The tall man crouched beside me, the knife cold against my cheek. His voice was low and steady, filled with satisfaction. "You should have walked away." Fireworks grew quieter behind us. The cheering from the waterfront felt distant, like another world. I could sense the shorter man arguing with him, pointing toward the fence where the woman had escaped. They bickered for a moment, giving me those few seconds I needed. My hand brushed against a broken chunk of concrete on the ground. I gripped it and swung upward as hard as I could, hitting the tall man under the jaw. His teeth cracked, blood spraying as he dropped the knife. I scrambled to my feet and bolted toward the maze of alleys, heart pounding so wildly I felt it in my throat. My legs burned as I ran, knocking over garbage bins to slow them down. I burst out onto West Hastings Street and stumbled into a group of drunk partygoers. I yelled for them to call emergency services and kept running toward a pair of police officers stationed nearby to control foot traffic. They stared, unsure whether I was drunk or crazy, but something in my voice convinced them. One radioed for backup while the other followed me. By the time we reached the courtyard, the 2 men had disappeared. They found the woman 2 blocks away, sitting on the curb in front of a late-night diner near the harbor. She was crying, shaking uncontrollably, but alive. Her name was Sabine, and she explained that she had been grabbed outside a bar when she stepped out to get a ride. She had never seen the men before. The detective believed it was part of an ongoing trafficking operation. The next few weeks crawled by slowly. I worked short shifts because nightmares chased me to work. Sometimes I would walk down West Hastings, thinking fresh air might help, but it only made things worse. One night while walking there, I saw a man curled up near a wall shivering violently. His clothes were soaked and snowflakes clung to his hair. I knelt beside him and tried to help, handing him the spare gloves from my pocket. His hands were ice and his voice trembled when he thanked me. I walked away feeling unsettled, and when I looked back a minute later, he was gone. A few days later, I saw his face printed on a missing poster taped to a bus shelter, dated 3 months earlier. My stomach twisted as I stared at it. I had helped someone who should not have been alive at all, someone who was still officially missing. Sometimes at night, I remembered the pale emptiness in his eyes. Another evening, fireworks testing began for the Lunar New Year celebrations. The harbor reflected streaks of red and gold across the dark water. For a split second, as the light shimmered across the docks, I saw a figure tied near a post, motionless, barely visible beneath the dock planks. When I blinked, the shape disappeared, leaving only ripples across the water. Crowds became another nightmare. I avoided big gatherings, but one night a friend invited me to a small apartment party in Gastown. I tried to stay normal, but halfway through the night, the host suddenly locked the balcony doors, trapping 2 people outside in the cold air. He said it was for safety, but his stiff smile made the hair on my neck stand up. I kept hearing footsteps behind me even when no one was there. As months passed, nothing in my mind settled. Every alley felt like a trap, every face in a dark hoodie made me freeze. I walked past the alley where it all began, near the quiet stretch behind Thurlow. The old shop had become a smoothie place, bright and colorful, but I could still feel the cold knife against my cheek whenever I looked at that spot. I kept thinking about Sabine, about the men who were still free, and about whether courage was worth the scars it leaves behind. I wondered who else had walked down that alley before me, and who would after. Sometimes at night, I felt like someone was watching me from the end of my hallway, quiet and patient. Sometimes I woke with the feeling that the tall man was still standing beside my bed, the cold edge of his knife tracing the line of my face. And sometimes, when the wind rolled off the harbor late at night, carrying the echo of fireworks in the distance, I swore I could hear footsteps in the alley behind my building, slow and deliberate, like someone who was annoyed they had unfinished business with me. This story teaches that danger can hide in the middle of a celebration, where everyone feels safe and distracted. It reminds us that staying aware of our surroundings can save lives, not only our own, but also someone who needs help. It shows that real bravery is not loud or perfect. It is choosing to act even when fear is stronger than courage. At the same time, the story warns that heroism has consequences, and stepping into danger can change a person forever. The lesson is to trust your instincts, help others when you can, and understand that a single choice may echo through your life long after the moment has passed. I never thought one cold New Year's Eve in Calgary would change my life forever, but every time I close my eyes, I still see the sky glowing the wrong color and hear sounds that do not belong to fireworks. I keep telling myself I should have known better, that I should have listened to the tight feeling in my chest the moment I stepped out of my car, but memories do not listen, they only return. I was a storyteller long before this night, someone who grew up sharing scary tales around winter bonfires just outside Banff when I was a kid. Those stories came from my grandfather, a man who believed shadows held old secrets and cold wind carried warnings. After he passed away, I stopped telling stories for a long time, but the fear inside me stayed. When I grew older, I worked odd jobs, drifting between towns across Alberta, until I eventually settled in a tiny apartment in Calgary. My younger brother, who had always been more social than me, moved there after his wedding and kept inviting me to gatherings. I refused almost every time because crowds made me uneasy, but this year he kept trying harder, saying he wanted me to join something big for once. When he told me he was hosting a New Year's party, he sounded excited in a way I had not heard since we were kids. He talked about how his neighbor would run a huge fireworks show and how everyone in the cul-de-sac was planning to step outside together at exactly 11:55 p.m. to watch. His voice carried this warm hope that pulled me in, and even though my stomach nodded, I finally agreed. I left my apartment around 7:45 p.m. and drove through the quiet winter streets. Snow clung to every corner, softening the city lights. Calgary looked peaceful from behind my windshield, but somewhere under that stillness, something felt wrong. I brushed it off as old anxiety from childhood, the same kind of fear that made me double-check every lock when wind whistled through cracks in the walls. When I reached my brother's neighborhood, I parked my car beneath a flickering street lamp. The houses around me looked nearly identical, with steep roofs covered in ice and tiny front lawns swallowed by fresh snow. I walked up his driveway, my breath clouding in the air, and he ran out to greet me with more enthusiasm than I deserved. He hugged me tightly, smelling like cinnamon and cheap mulled wine, and pulled me inside. The house buzzed with voices. People laughed, toasted, moved around each other with warm drinks in their hands. I tried to blend into the background, nodding politely as my brother introduced me to a collection of neighbors whose names blurred in my mind. The living room glowed in yellow light, and someone had hung shimmering decorations across the windows. Music played softly in the background, and for a moment, it felt manageable. But the unease inside me kept growing, pulling my attention toward the backyard every few minutes. Through the glass door, I could see a tall man bundled in thick winter gear adjusting rows of black tubes arranged in metal racks. They pointed upward like the hollow eyes of something waiting to wake. A small table stood beside them with crates and bundled wires, but the distance made it hard to see details. I stepped closer to the door to get a better look. Snow had been shoveled to create a narrow path leading right to the setup. The racks were pressed too close to the wooden fence behind the yard, and the tubes were angled a little strange, something subtle that pushed against the edge of my mind. The man outside moved with purpose, wearing heavy gloves that glinted under the patio light. His coat said something about pyrotechnicians, but it looked like an old patch you could buy anywhere. A woman beside me said the neighbor did fireworks every year, and that he was a total expert. She spoke with such casual confidence that I almost believed her. Her son, a small kid bundled in a bright blue jacket, sat near the back step, watching the snow drift from the roof like tiny stars falling. I wanted to say something about the angle of the racks, or the fence, or the fact that nobody else outside wore anything protective, but I swallowed the words. I was not brave enough to ruin the party mood with warnings, especially when I knew everyone would brush it off as me being nervous for no reason. I kept quiet, but the pressure in my chest pressed harder. By the time it reached 11:30 p.m., people started gathering near the sliding door. The night outside looked like a sheet of silver, the snow reflecting street lights and distant fireworks from other parts of the city. Someone turned up the music and connected a phone to a speaker, letting the New Year's countdown play faintly under the chatter. My brother found me again, his cheeks flushed from drinking, and told me the show was going to be incredible. He said the neighbor had spent a huge amount of money on this display. I forced a smile even though dread coiled tighter inside me. When everyone filed outside into the cold, I followed. The air bit at my skin, and snow crunched under dozens of boots. People formed a loose semicircle around the fireworks racks, laughing and stamping their feet to stay warm. I stood near the back, still close enough to see everything clearly. The neighbor, a broad man with a thick coat and frost clinging to his beard, lifted a lighter. His breath fogged the air as he moved down the row of racks, leaning in to check each fuse with careful hands. He looked confident, almost proud, and for a moment I thought maybe I was wrong, maybe everything would be fine. The countdown began at 11:55 p.m. The voices rose above the cold wind, the sound echoing down the street. The neighbor stood ready. People cheered and clapped, not knowing what was about to happen. My fingers tingled with cold and fear. When the last second dropped, he lit the first fuse. The first few fireworks shot into the sky in brilliant colors. Golden sparks burst and fell like slow raindrops. Red ones cracked sharply, echoing against the nearby houses. People gasped and applauded, their faces glowing with reflected light. The show moved like a rhythm, each burst timed beautifully behind the next. For a moment, the fear inside me eased. I even took out my phone to record it. The sky shone with massive purple blooms that made the snow glitter. The cold air vibrated with the explosions, and people pulled closer to each other, laughing through the noise. Then something shifted. One of the racks near the fence, the one on the far left, looked slightly off. I blinked, unsure if the angle had always been that strange, but before I could understand it, the whole thing leaned. It didn't fall fast at first. It tilted just a little, then a little more, and by the time people noticed, one of the tubes had already fired. The mortar blasted sideways instead of upward. It screamed across the yard like a burning spear, striking the fence only a few feet from where I stood. The explosion was lower, deeper, violent, ripping through wood and spraying sharp splinters into the crowd. Someone screamed. Someone else fell against another person. A chair toppled. A second tube angled downward, its fuse sparkling like a fuse on a bomb. The panic rose so quickly it felt alive. I shouted for people to move, but my voice was swallowed by the roar of the upright fireworks still shooting into the sky. I grabbed a man beside me and pulled him away just before another mortar launched. It hit the ground, skipped across the snow, and erupted against the back wall of the house. The wall cracked and shattered glass rained down. A shard cut across my forearm and bright red dripped into the snow. I didn't feel the pain, only a hot rush of fear that pushed me to move faster. The yard turned to chaos. People ran in every direction, slipping on ice, crashing into chairs. The woman with the kid grabbed her son and bolted toward the side gate. Someone near the racks fell screaming when a shard of wood pierced their leg. Another person cried for help from somewhere near the steps. The neighbor, who had been so confident before, now stood frozen near the collapsing rack. His face drained of color. His hands trembled. The last bits of his pride crumbled with the falling metal. He shouted something I could not hear. More tubes fired wildly. One shot into the neighbor's yard behind the fence, erupting in a ball of orange light that shook the ground. Someone on the other side screamed for help. Houses lit up from block to block, porch lights flicking on as people looked out their windows, too far away to understand or help. I ducked, staying low, trying to weave between fallen chairs and spilled drinks. Snow mixed with drinks created a slick layer under my boots. I called for my brother, searching desperately as more explosions rattled the air. I spotted him crouched near the patio door with two other guests, his face pale and terrified. When he saw me, he reached out, his lips moving but no sound making it through the constant booming. I pushed toward him, trying not to stumble. Another mortar blasted sideways, hitting the roof of the house beside us. Snow and shingles cascaded down. People screamed and threw themselves in every direction. Someone tripped over a cord and fell hard. I reached my brother and grabbed his arm. He was shaking uncontrollably. We pressed against the wall under a small overhang that protected us from some debris, but not from the next explosion that shook the yard. We needed to get out, but the patio door was crowded with people pushing, yelling, trying to escape inside. I pulled my brother toward the narrow path between the house and the fence. The space was tight, barely enough for one person at a time, but it was safer than standing in the open. Snow brushed against my coat as we squeezed through. Sparks flew overhead. The cold wind carried smoke into our faces, stinging our eyes. Behind us, the last mortars fired one by one, some into the sky, some into the yard, each one a threat that felt too close. We burst out into the front yard just as another tube fired and finally emptied itself. The night looked torn open. The snow glowed faint orange from fire licking at the hole in the back wall. Smoke drifted upward, mixing with the last bits of fireworks still hanging in the air. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone cried near the sidewalk. A man lay on the snow clutching his chest while another guest tried to keep him conscious. The woman and her son sat shaking near the driveway, the boy sobbing into her coat. My brother held on to me like he was afraid he might disappear. Firefighters arrived quickly, hosing down the flames. Paramedics rushed from person to person. My arm was wrapped in a bandage while I watched them carry away the old man I had pulled earlier as he struggled to breathe. They rushed another person to the ambulance with a wooden splinter lodged deep in their leg. Police questioned the neighbor who had claimed to be an expert. He finally admitted he had never been trained, that he got the fireworks from a friend who smuggled them across the border. His proud expression was gone. He looked like a man whose entire life had collapsed in minutes. My brother's house suffered deep damage, and he moved out months later because he could not bear to walk into that backyard again. I kept a small scar on my arm, a thin, pale mark that glowed strangely when cold. It reminds me of the moments when everything turned from celebration to terror. Sometimes, after midnight when roads are empty, I feel like a car follows me no matter where I turn. Sometimes strangers look at me like they know things I have forgotten, things tied to that night. Once, I woke up in a snowbank just outside my own apartment, missing my wallet and phone, unable to remember how I got there. I tell myself it was exhaustion, or cold, or fear, but deep down I wonder if something else followed me from that night, something hidden in the shadows between the explosions. Every New Year's Eve since then, I stay inside with my curtains closed. When fireworks begin outside, I put on headphones and turn the television up until the walls shake. I cannot let myself hear those sounds again. The sideways blasts, the screams, the echo of something wrong tearing the night apart. People say fear fades with time, but mine has roots now, deep ones that twist through every winter night. This story teaches that being careful can save your life, even during happy moments. It shows that one unsafe choice can hurt many people at once. It reminds us to listen to our feelings when something seems wrong. Most of all, it tells us to respect safety rules so everyone can enjoy celebrations without fear. I had no idea that the new year would begin with something that would stay inside me forever, so deep that even now, I feel it breathing behind my ribs like a cold hand waiting to grab me again. Montreal was covered in thick snow that night, the kind that makes the whole city look soft and dead at the same time. And my wife Alina and I had just finished cleaning up after our New Year's Eve house party. I work as a volunteer emergency responder for a small district near the northern edge of the city, and I have done that job for almost 10 years, long enough to see house fires, bar fights, and car crashes on slippery roads. I never expected anything supernatural or violent, only the usual holiday accidents that come with frozen streets and late-night drinking. I had just crawled into bed when my pager screamed at 2:43 a.m. I sat up so fast I felt dizzy, and Alina groaned and pulled the blanket over her head, still tired from hosting our guests. I kissed her forehead, grabbed my heavy winter gear, and ran outside into the freezing air. When I turned the ignition of my truck, I saw the temperature reading -22. It was the kind of cold that could kill a person if they stayed still too long. The dispatcher's voice came through the radio, saying it was a single vehicle crash near the old industrial road by the river. Possible entrapment. I thought it would be the same story as every New Year's Eve. Someone drunk, someone tired, someone trying to drive home through ice and darkness. I even thought I'd be back home by dawn, eating toast with my kids. But when I rolled up to the site, the sky was still black except for a faint red glow above downtown buildings, and the snow reflected our truck headlights like crushed diamonds. The crashed vehicle was a dark blue SUV flipped on its roof beside a frozen ditch. Steam rose from its engine like white breath. My chief, a calm and steady man named Malcolm, was already there with 2 other volunteers, a veteran named Jonas and a younger recruit named Leo who had joined a few months earlier. At first, everything seemed routine. The driver sat on the ground a few meters away from the SUV, bleeding from his forehead and rocking slightly. But Malcolm didn't call me over to check the driver. He waved me toward the overturned SUV. His face showed something I had never seen on him before, a tight mix of confusion and fear. I walked over, and he whispered in a low voice, telling me to look inside the back of the SUV. He pointed his flashlight into the shattered rear window, where the cargo space had collapsed inward. Inside the mess of broken glass and tossed tools, something large was wrapped in a dark green tarp held together by bungee cords. Part of the tarp had slipped, showing a pale human foot. The toenails were painted bright red. I took a step back, feeling my breath freeze in my chest. The cold air felt heavier now, like something was standing behind me. Malcolm grabbed my arm and leaned closer. He whispered that he had already called police, but the roads were iced over so it might take time for them to reach us. The driver was still rocking on the snow, holding his head. Jonas knelt beside him trying to talk to him, but the man just stared at nothing, muttering under his breath. I walked over with my medical kit. Up close, the man looked about 45, with rough hands and a face carved by harsh winters. Blood ran down from a cut near his temple. He didn't flinch when I cleaned it, which scared me. People with head injuries often look lost, but this was cold emptiness, like he wasn't fully there. When I asked him his name, he didn't answer. His lips moved quietly, and when I leaned closer, I caught broken pieces of French and English mixed together. At first, I thought he assumed I couldn't understand the French parts, but the words were strange and broken. Something like, "not supposed to be here," she made me promise, and I didn't want to see her again. After a moment, he grabbed my wrist with surprising strength, pulling me close until I could smell blood on his breath. His voice cracked when he whispered that she was already dead when he found her, and he didn't know what else to do. Before I could ask what he meant, Malcolm walked over and heard the last part. He asked the man where he found her. The man hesitated, breathing hard, like thinking hurt him. Then he said that he worked at a cemetery north of Montreal, that he had been driving home from a New Year's gathering when he saw the body lying in the snow near an abandoned warehouse by the river. He claimed she was already cold and stiff, so he panicked and wrapped her in a tarp, planning to bring her to the police station in daylight. He said he didn't want anyone thinking he killed her, but something in his eyes told me he was hiding more. Or worse, that he didn't even know what he had done. Just then, something strange happened. We heard faint music echoing from somewhere behind the warehouses. It sounded like New Year's party music, thumping and distant, like it was bouncing off walls. Leo pointed his flashlight toward the alley between two old buildings, saying he heard people. I walked a few steps toward the sound, but the music faded suddenly, leaving only silence. There were fresh footprints in the snow leading into a basement door, but the door was open and the basement was completely empty. The music hadn't come from inside. It had come from nowhere, like something was luring us. A shiver crawled down my spine. I walked back fast. A police cruiser finally arrived, lights flashing blue and red over the snow. A tall female officer stepped out, older, in her 50s maybe, with sharp eyes that looked like they had seen everything. She spoke to Malcolm and then crouched beside the driver while paramedics worked on him. He began talking again, repeating his story in a fast, scared voice. The officer walked to the SUV and looked at the tarp. Her expression hardened. She called for more units. We all stepped back as more police cars came, followed by a coroner's van. They put crime tape around the site and told us to stay out of the circle. The driver was taken away in the ambulance. He kept turning his head, looking at the SUV like he feared something inside might follow him. As the coroner's team pulled the tarp out, I felt sick. The shape underneath was human, frozen, bent in ways no living body could be bent. The red polish on the toes stood out painfully against the pale skin. On our way back to our trucks, Leo whispered, asking if I thought the man had told us the truth. I didn't answer. The whole situation felt wrong in a way I couldn't describe. Not just tragic, wrong. When I got home at dawn, my two sons were already awake watching cartoons. Alina looked at my face and knew something bad had happened. I told her it was just a rough night. That morning, every time I closed my eyes, I saw that foot sticking out of the tarp. 3 days later, the news broke. The woman had been identified as a 28-year-old who lived in a nearby district. She had gone missing on New Year's Eve after leaving a friend's party. The coroner's report said she had died from blunt force trauma to the head between 7:30 p.m. At 9:00 p.m., the driver had told us he found her after midnight. He was arrested and charged with murder. Evidence from the SUV tied him to her. But something still didn't add up in my mind. I kept seeing how terrified he had been when he whispered those words to me. How he begged me to believe he had only found her and not killed her. Later that month, I ran into the officer at a gas station. She told me the man and the victim had known each other from a grief support group. He had grown attached to her, and when she pushed him away, he became angry and obsessive. On New Year's Eve, he followed her car, forced her off the road near the river, and killed her. He tried to hide the body and create a story about finding her by chance. But here's the part she told me in a low voice, the part that never made the news. When officers went to check the abandoned warehouse area where he claimed he saw her body, they found something strange in the snow. Footprints, yes, but more than footprints. Drag marks. As if someone had walked alone for a few meters, then been pulled backward by something else. No vehicle tracks. No second person. Just long marks, like someone had been dragged into the dark by invisible hands. She said there were also signs that someone else had walked around the area later. Bare footprints. Small, frozen into the ice. The officer said they didn't match the victim or the driver. She didn't know who they belonged to. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept thinking about the music that had lured us toward the basement, the fresh footprints that led nowhere, the way the man whispered that she was dead before he found her. And I remembered the drunk stranger at our party before midnight, the one who staggered to me, speaking in rushed French, saying something about a soul waiting under the river and a promise that should never be kept. I thought he was just drunk. Now I wonder if he was warning me. The driver was found guilty months later and given life without parole. I watched every update, every detail. I wanted to understand. I wanted a clean answer, but I never got one. What haunts me the most is not the body in the tarp or the guilt in the man's eyes. It's the confusion I felt that night, because I believed him. I looked at him and felt sorry for him. I thought he was a scared man who had made a stupid mistake. I never felt the evil sitting right beside him. Maybe something did pull that woman across the snow. Maybe something did make her run barefoot. Maybe something was still following the driver long before he flipped his SUV. And maybe, when the strange music called us into the alley, it wasn't trying to distract us. Maybe it wanted us too. The story teaches us that danger does not always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a tired man sitting in the snow with blood on his face. Sometimes it looks like someone asking for help. Sometimes it looks innocent, quiet, and broken. The real lesson is that evil can hide behind fear, gentleness, and weakness. And we must never trust people only because they look helpless. We must trust truth, evidence, and our instincts, not emotions. The narrator learned that sympathy is powerful, but when given to the wrong person, it can blind us and put others at risk. I never understood why the last night of the year felt so heavy, so full of strange energy, like the world was holding its breath before turning the page. My name is Marin, and I grew up hearing that Edmonton winters had their own kind of ghosts, the kind that followed the cold wind through alleys and frozen streets. My grandmother used to whisper that New Year's Eve made the spirits restless because the boundary between old and new was thin as frost on glass. I always thought she was only trying to scare me, until the year everything changed. It happened long after I had finished school and worked my way into a job in community events. The kind where you spent more time planning celebrations for other people than living your own life. I had spent months exhausted and lonely, so when my friend Rena begged me to celebrate New Year's Eve with her at an upscale Edmonton nightclub called Astra Hall, I told myself I deserved at least one night to feel alive again. She said it was the kind of place where the lights looked unreal, where you could pretend you were someone braver, someone untouched by fear. I bought a silver dress that cost too much and heels that felt like torture devices. Rena picked me up around 9:45 p.m., the sky already black except for the glow of fireworks tests happening near the river valley. A bonfire burned behind a nearby apartment block, loud and crackling, people cheering around it as we drove past. I thought I heard someone shouting for help behind the fire, but the noise swallowed the sound and I convinced myself it was my imagination. When we arrived at Astra Hall, the line curled around the block, bodies wrapped in coats, breath misting in the freezing air. Music thumped so hard I could feel it in my ribs. Inside, the place looked unreal. Glass chandeliers sparkled like ice storms, beams of violet light sliding across a packed dance floor. People in glittering outfits moved together like a living tide. The air smelled like expensive perfume, smoke machines, and something too sweet to name. I ordered one drink at the bar, a simple cranberry vodka, telling myself it would be the only one. Rena vanished around 10:30 p.m., chasing after a guy she once met at a summer festival. I ended up standing by a tall table overlooking the dancing crowd, watching everyone glow under the lights. I checked my phone. It said 11:12 p.m. I wanted to find Rena before the countdown, but first I scanned the room for her bright blue dress. No luck. That was when a man in a server uniform walked toward me. He carried a tray with one champagne flute sitting in the center. He was tall, maybe 6'2", wearing a black vest and white shirt like the rest of the staff. His face was sharp, cold, too perfect for someone working a party shift. He placed the glass in front of me and spoke, but his words were lost under the music. He gestured toward the bar, so I assumed he was offering complimentary champagne for the countdown. I thanked him and he nodded once before disappearing into the crowd like smoke fading from a match. The champagne looked fancy, tiny bubbles rising in neat lines. I lifted it, took a small sip, tasted bitterness, but assumed it was an expensive brand I wasn't used to. I drank a second sip and set it down. The room began to tilt. At first it felt like standing up too fast, a soft head rush, but then the lights sharpened painfully and the music grew so loud it hurt. My legs turned heavy, my hands numb. I knew this wasn't from one drink and 2 sips. Something was wrong. I tried to breathe, tried to focus, but the edges of the room darkened as if shadows were closing in. I forced myself to walk, pushing through the crowd toward where I thought the restrooms were. People bumped into me, laughing, shouting, wrapped up in their own joy, completely unaware that the world was bending sideways around me. My vision narrowed. My heart hammered too fast. Every sound stretched and warped. The countdown clock on the main screen flashed 11:37 p.m. 23 minutes until midnight. 23 minutes until everyone would be shouting and distracted. I stumbled forward, but then 2 men appeared beside me like they had been waiting for their cue. One grabbed my elbow, the other placed a hand against my back. Their smiles were wide and practiced. "We found you at last," the one on my left said with fake relief, acting like we were old friends. People nearby glanced, but he grinned at them as if everything was normal, and they went back to celebrating. The younger man guided me like he owned my body, pushing me toward the back hall where the restroom signs glowed above the dark walkway. I tried to pull away, but my limbs felt disconnected, like my joints belonged to someone else. They whispered things meant for strangers around us. Things like, "She always drinks too much, and she wanders off so easily." People believed them because it was easier than imagining the truth. Fear cut through the drug fog long enough for me to remember something I once read, that predators count on their victims going quiet. I forced what little strength I had into planting my heels. I tried to scream, but the sound came out twisted and weak. The stocky man squeezed my arm harder, pain shooting through my skin. "Easy now," he whispered in a low, rough voice, trying to make me stop resisting. The restroom sign was only a few feet away. I let my body collapse, dropping all my weight at once. The move shocked them both. Their hands slipped. I lunged sideways, crashing into a group of women in silver dresses. Drink spilled. They shrieked. The confusion lasted only seconds, but it was long enough for me to crawl toward the restroom like a wounded animal trying to reach shelter. I didn't remember pushing the door open. I didn't remember locking myself inside the last stall. I only remembered the cold tile wall pressing against my back and my phone trembling in my hand as I tried to dial the club's number I had saved earlier. "Someone drugged me," I tried to say. 2 men, trying to take me out. My voice sounded far away, broken. The woman on the phone sharpened immediately. "Where are you?" "Bathroom. Back hallway." "Stay there. Don't move. Security will knock 3 times and say the word midnight." I dropped the phone. The floor felt like it was swaying. My mind drifted in and out like a dying flashlight. The door opened once. 2 girls walked in talking about some boy named Oliver kissing the wrong girl. They fixed their makeup, laughed, and left. They never saw me hiding only a few feet away. The second time the door creaked open, something felt wrong. There were no voices, no heels. Only soft, slow steps moving across the floor. I held my breath. A shadow passed under every stall, one by one, until it reached mine. It paused. The person outside breathed slow and deep like they had all the time in the world. A single knock hit my stall door. Not security signal, just one knock. Heavy, waiting. My heart raced so hard I thought it would burst. Then the main door burst open and a woman shouted that security was clearing the restroom. The shadow fled instantly, shoes whispering over tile as the intruder slipped away. When security opened my stall, I saw a woman with strong arms and calm eyes kneeling beside me. Her shirt said security. Behind her stood a man with a shaved head and a radio on his hip. They guided me to a small office filled with monitors showing camera feeds of the club. Confetti drifted on screen like falling ice. Midnight had come and gone. A manager named Harlan brought me water and pulled up camera footage. The female guard stayed beside me, steady and focused. They found the man in the server uniform entering through a back service door around 10:53 p.m. He wasn't an employee. He had a stolen wristband. On another camera, he mixed something into the champagne before walking straight to me. It lasted maybe 4 seconds. He disappeared back through the crowd after handing it to me. Then they brought up footage of the alley behind the club. The man waited by the back exit like a patient predator. He checked the door handle repeatedly. He looked at his phone. He paced in slow lines, returning again and again as if rehearsing something dark. But what chilled me most was not him. It was how synchronized everything looked. The men who approached me inside never appeared on the outdoor camera. They were never near him, meaning they learned to split the hunt. They worked as a silent machine. The police came around 2:19 a.m. 2 detectives stood across from me while a paramedic took my vitals. My body felt floaty, cold, fading. They said the signs pointed to something common in assault cases, and later the blood test showed traces of GHB. Rena found me around 3:10 a.m., crying so hard her makeup streaked down her cheeks. She kept apologizing, saying she lost track of time and thought I had only wandered off. I couldn't bring myself to blame her. None of this was her fault. The detectives promised to do everything they could, but their voices carried a tired weight, the kind that comes from seeing monsters walk free too many times. I spent the next day in bed, lights on, curtains shut, flinching at every sound. Rena stayed with me for 2 nights, checking the locks again and again without being asked. The bruises on my arm turned dark, then faded to yellow. The police called later to say they couldn't identify any of the men. The case went cold quietly, slipping away like smoke in winter air. Weeks later, something strange happened. I woke up early for work and walked to my car in the dim blue of winter morning. Frost covered everything like powdered sugar. When I reached for the door handle of my car, I froze. There was blood smeared across the handle, fresh. Not from a frozen cut, not from me. I stepped back shaking, feeling the cold air move around me like a warning. Later that day, a taxi driver refused to take payment when I rode home from work. He only stared at me through the rearview mirror with a strange expression and said I would pay later in a low voice, then drove off before I could respond. At night, the memory of the bonfire returned to me, the one we passed on New Year's Eve. How I thought I heard someone screaming behind it. How the fire drowned out the sound. How people around it cheered too loudly. How easy it is to hide a cry for help behind a wall of celebration. Sometimes I lie awake imagining the man in the server uniform waiting at another door, testing another handle, pacing in another alley, phone glowing in his hand like a signal between him and the shadows. Sometimes I wonder if he came looking for me again. If the blood on my car was his way of saying he still remembered. If the knock on the bathroom stall had not been the end, only the beginning. I don't go to clubs anymore. I don't accept drinks I didn't watch being poured. I keep my doors locked, always. And every New Year's Eve, while fireworks bloom over Edmonton like shattered stars and people press together to celebrate, I sit alone in my apartment, listening to the wind move down the hallways like something searching for a way in. Because the world believes the new year brings hope. But I know better. I know some things follow you even when the calendar flips, even when the night passes, even when you think you got away. This story teaches that danger can hide even in bright, crowded places. So always trust the first spark of fear inside you, because instincts rarely lie. Never accept a drink you did not see being poured, and keep close to the people you trust, since predators depend on confusion and silence. Making a scene is not weakness. It can save your life when others are not paying attention. Healing after fear takes time, but awareness becomes your strongest protection. In the end, staying alert is not paranoia, it is survival. I always told myself that New Year's Eve was a night better spent indoors, far from crowds and noise, far from the cold streets of Ottawa, where people gathered every year to shout and celebrate under the glow of Parliament Hill. I like to imagine I was made for quiet spaces and soft light, for warm rooms and predictable routines, because life had taught me early that the world outside could break you without warning. My name is Marcus, and before that night I worked in building maintenance, fixing pipes and heating systems in old government buildings, climbing narrow ladders and crawling through cold tunnels, always listening to echoes that sometimes did not feel like they belonged to me. People assumed I avoided parties because I was shy, but the truth lived deeper. When I was 14, my older cousin went missing on a New Year's Eve in Montreal. My family spoke about it quietly, like the cold itself had swallowed him, and every year since then I felt something heavy in my chest when the calendar approached its end. I never understood why until the night everything changed. I rented a 2-bedroom apartment on the 6th floor of an old building on Laurier Avenue, close enough to downtown that you could hear the fireworks, but far enough that you rarely saw the people setting them off. I was alone that year, but I had invited my friend Daniel and his girlfriend Mara to stop by for dinner and maybe watch the countdown on TV. We were all in our 30s, tired from work and responsibilities, so we planned something quiet. Nothing wild, nothing loud. Just a normal night where the world outside could do whatever it wanted while we sat safe in my apartment. At least, that was the idea. Daniel and Mara left around 1:20 a.m., or as my mind still says it, 1:20 in the morning, soon after the televised countdown ended. Mara had to work an early shift at a grocery store, and Daniel looked half asleep already. I walked them out to the hallway, waved as they headed toward the elevator, their steps tapping softly on the old carpet. When the elevator doors slid shut, the silence felt warm and familiar, the kind of silence I had come to love. A peaceful start to a new year. I stepped back into my apartment, locked the door, and began gathering plates and empty cans from the table. My TV was still playing some post-midnight show, people laughing in bright studios, confetti falling like gentle snow. For a moment, I let myself believe the new year would be calm. No surprises, no fear. Just another winter slowly turning into spring. But the world has its own plans, and sometimes it waits for that one moment when you finally feel safe before tearing everything open. The first crack came from the ceiling above my living room. It sounded sharp and unnatural, like a bone snapping close to my ear. I froze with a wet cloth in my hand, staring upward. A piece of drywall broke free and dropped to the carpet, releasing a cloud of pale dust that drifted in the lamplight. I blinked slowly as if my eyes were lying, as if the ceiling had opened itself just to scare me. At first, I thought maybe ice had shifted on the roof because Ottawa winters were harsh. Or maybe construction material had come loose. But then I saw the hole. A small, perfectly round puncture in the ceiling that looked too clean, too exact, too wrong. I lived on the top floor. There was nothing above me but the roof and the night sky. I walked closer and noticed something glinting inside the fallen dust, something small and metallic. I crouched, reached out, and touched it without thinking. The heat jolted through my fingers, and I dropped it. My brain stumbled over itself. A bullet. A real bullet had come through the roof of my home. I bent down again, careful this time, and picked it up between 2 fingers. It was warm like a mug left out for a few minutes, warm enough to tell me it had been fired not long ago. I held that misshapen piece of metal and felt the world shrink around me. My lungs tightened. My heartbeat pushed against my throat. Someone had shot into the air outside, and the bullet had pierced the roof of my building, falling into my living room as if the sky itself had decided to strike. I wanted to believe it was a one-time accident, just a freak moment in a loud celebration. But accidents do not normally return. The second crack tore through the ceiling 2 feet away from the first hole. dust sprayed out like sand from a storm. Another bullet punched through, fell to the couch, bounced to the floor, and rolled slowly until it stopped at the leg of my coffee table. This time my body reacted before my mind. I dropped to my knees and crawled behind the kitchen counter, curling tight against the cabinets. My whole body shook. Every beat of my heart sounded like footsteps behind me, like someone was approaching even though no one was there. Outside, the noise of the city grew sharper, less like fireworks and more like gunshots, pops and cracks and sharp bursts that seemed to echo off every government building. My breathing turned into short, panicked gasps as I fumbled for my phone, my fingers stiff and clumsy. When it unlocked, I dialed emergency services. The call rang 4 times before a tired voice answered. I tried to speak clearly, but my words tangled in fear. I told the operator about the bullets, about the holes in my ceiling, about how I was hiding behind the counter. She told me slowly that Ottawa was receiving dozens of reports of gunfire across the city, that officers were overwhelmed, and that it might take 40 to 60 minutes for help to reach me. 40 to 60 minutes while the sky rained metal. She told me to stay low and keep away from windows, but I already knew that. I could feel danger in the air like cold breath on the back of my neck. I hung up and immediately called Daniel. He picked up sounding confused and half asleep until he understood what I was saying. Mara gasped in the background. Daniel said he wanted to come back, but I told him not to. The streets were dangerous right now. Stray bullets were falling everywhere. The last thing I wanted was for him to drive into something he could not escape. He told me to text him every few minutes, just to prove I was still alive. I agreed, even though I did not know if I could keep that promise. I pressed myself to the floor and began crawling toward the hallway, keeping my body as flat as possible. I needed a place with no ceiling exposure, somewhere protected. My bathroom was at the end of the hall, windowless, with an old cast-iron tub that felt like the safest place in the world. I dragged myself along the floor, my elbows burning, my muscles trembling. Another loud crack echoed from the roof, and for a moment the whole building seemed to breathe heavily, as if it knew what was happening. People outside laughed and cheered as loud pops continued across the night. And then, somewhere close, somewhere within hearing distance, the celebration stopped. Footsteps echoed behind my apartment door, slow and deliberate, like someone walking alone down a government corridor late at night. I held my breath as the steps passed my door, paused, then continued. But when I looked through the peephole later, no one had been there. The hallway was empty and silent, too silent for a holiday night. That strangeness followed me like a shadow as I reached the bathroom. I climbed into the tub and curled up, pressing my back against the cold iron. The darkness wrapped around me like a heavy blanket, and every sound outside seemed amplified, every crack in the sky sounding closer. I held my phone to my chest, watching the battery slowly drain. Texts from Daniel appeared every few minutes. "Still okay," I typed back. "Still here." Even when my hands shook so violently the words nearly failed. Time twisted in that bathroom. Minutes stretched until they felt like entire seasons. I could hear distant music from the street below, soft at first, then fading abruptly as if someone had turned off the entire neighborhood. Then came a scream, sharp and jagged, slicing through the noise. I pressed my palms over my ears and prayed it was not what it sounded like. The scream did not return, which somehow made it worse. Then another moment unfolded, one that even now I do not fully understand. A light knock sounded at my apartment door, gentle, precise. I stayed frozen in the tub, unable to breathe. The knock came again, just 2 soft taps. I crawled out only far enough to peek down the hallway. Through the faint light under the door, I saw a shadow move, slow and stretching unnaturally across the floor. It lingered. Then the doorknob twitched, just a tiny movement like someone testing if it was unlocked. I held my breath until my lungs burned. Eventually, the shadow shifted away. But when I checked the peephole long after sunrise, there were no footprints in the dusty hallway, even though I was sure I had heard someone walking there. Around 3:14 in the morning, or as my mind says it, 3:14 a.m., another bullet tore into my apartment. I heard it strike somewhere near my bedroom, the thud muffled through layers of drywall. I stayed in the tub. I could not move anymore. My body felt like stone. My mind drifted in and out, imagining things that might have been real or might have been fear twisting itself into shapes. At one point, I remembered the strange event earlier that evening when I stopped by the public celebration near Parliament Hill before heading home. Security guards had moved through the crowd quietly, clearing people out without explanation. No announcement, no warning. They simply waved everyone away, their faces pale. I heard someone ask what was happening, but no one answered. The celebration ended early, and we all walked away confused. Only later did I wonder if they knew something. If they had seen something in the sky or on the rooftops, something they could not explain. And then another memory slipped in. On my way home from the store earlier that afternoon, a man wearing a heavy winter coat stopped me. He held out a small black bag and asked me to hold it for a moment. Before I could agree or question him, he placed it in my hands and walked into the crowd. He never returned. I kept glancing around for him, feeling a strange, cold worry creep down my spine, but he disappeared into the sea of people. I panicked and checked the bag, convinced it might be something dangerous, but inside I found only old papers and a small rusted compass. Still, I felt unsettled, like the bag carried the scent of a life I did not want to enter. I left it on a bench and hurried home. Now, hiding in the tub hours later, I wondered if that man had followed me, or if he had meant to give the bag to someone else entirely, or if he had never existed at all. The gunfire slowly thinned as the night dragged toward morning. The city grew quieter, filled with distant sirens and the low growl of engines. I stayed in the tub until the sky began to lighten, until the last echo from outside faded. My phone battery reached 5%. My hands felt numb. My legs tingled with pins and needles. Every muscle in my back ached from the cast iron pressing into me. When I finally stood, my body felt like an abandoned building, filled with dust and darkness. I walked through my apartment in small steps, surveying the damage. 3 holes in total, 1 above the carpet, 1 above the couch, 1 near my bedroom door that I had not even heard. 3 bullets lay scattered like small iron seeds that had fallen from a broken sky. I picked them up with shaking fingers and placed them inside a jar on my counter. When I looked at them, I saw the truth I had been avoiding all night. I could have died. Anyone could have died. Ottawa had felt safe until then, but safety was only a story we told ourselves. Police arrived around 8:40 a.m. 2 exhausted officers who photographed the holes and filled out a report they knew would not solve anything. They told me several people across the city had been injured by falling bullets. One man was in critical condition at a hospital in Gatineau. They gave me a pamphlet with victim resources and wished me a happy new year in a voice that did not believe its own words. I moved out 2 weeks later, broke my lease, paid the penalty, found a basement apartment in a quiet neighborhood near retirees and families. My landlord tried to charge me for ceiling repairs until I threatened to show the news photos of the bullet holes. He backed down. Daniel helped me pack, and as we carried the last box down the stairs, I looked up at my old apartment window and felt nothing but relief. No sorrow, no nostalgia, just the feeling of escaping something I still could not name. I still keep the 3 bullets in that jar. People tell me I should throw them away, but I cannot. They remind me how random survival can be, how close I came to being another siren on another winter night. Every New Year's Eve since then, when fireworks echo across Ottawa, my body tenses and my mind flashes back to the ceiling breaking open above me, to the footsteps outside my door, to the disappearing man with the bag, to the guards clearing the celebration for reasons they never explained, to the feeling that something unseen had moved through the city that night, something the sky tried to warn us about. Maybe the bullets were the only part we could understand. Maybe everything else stayed hidden where the cold air swallows sound and breath. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of early morning, I wonder if those footsteps will return, or if the shadow at my door still lingers somewhere in the hallway, waiting for the next time the sky opens. Staying safe on holidays means understanding that careless actions can harm people you may never meet, so responsibility matters even in moments of celebration. What goes up must come down, and every bullet fired into the sky returns with deadly force, teaching us that fun without caution can become tragedy. Communities stay safer when people respect laws, think before acting, and understand how their choices affect others. True strength is choosing safety, awareness, and empathy, because one responsible decision can save a life you never knew was in danger. I was not ready for what happened that night, and even now, when the world feels calm and ordinary, some part of me still waits for the moment everything will twist again. My name is Ryan, and I grew up in a quiet part of Winnipeg, a place everyone said was safe, steady, and honest. Maybe that was true once, but the city changes in the dark in ways people do not understand. I learned that on a New Year's Eve I can never forget, a night I still hear in my sleep like something is tapping inside the walls, waiting for me to listen. It began as a simple plan. I did not want to spend the last night of the year alone again, pacing my apartment like someone trapped in a loop. My friend Talia felt the same, so we agreed to head downtown, to the crowded celebrations near the Exchange District, where bright lights filled the sky and every street carried the sound of people laughing or cheering. I felt lighter for the first time in months, as if being in that crowd meant nothing bad could touch me. Talia kept poking my arm, pointing at people wearing ridiculous hats or dancing too early, laughing so loudly she almost choked. I laughed with her, trying to believe that maybe the new year really could fix something inside me, something I had been ignoring. The huge countdown timer glowed against a tall glass building, a broken mirror of color and sound, and the snowflakes floating down shimmered like falling sparks. Everything felt alive, warm, safe, even though the air burned with cold. When the timer hit 0, everyone exploded with cheers. The fireworks rose behind the buildings like giant flowers bursting open, painting the night in colors too bright to look at. People hugged, jumped, screamed, kissed strangers, and the city felt like it was breathing for all of us at once. I lifted my phone to record, almost poking someone in the face, and Talia did the same, shouting something I could not hear over the roar. For a moment, we were simply happy. But crowds shift without warning, and joy can crack open faster than people realize. Within minutes, the chaos took a different shape. People pushed toward the Portage and main metro entrance. We did not mean to move that way, but the crowd became a river dragging us forward. Talia was right ahead of me, her long red scarf bright in the lights, glowing like a signal I was supposed to follow. I kept my eyes on it because everything else felt too loud and too shifting to trust. The pressure of bodies grew tighter, and someone bumped my back hard enough to make me stumble. I tried to keep close to her, but the crowd swayed sideways like a giant wave, and a noisy group of people cut between us. They were drunk, shouting songs that didn't match the atmosphere anymore, and their elbows forced us apart. I called her name, but the fireworks swallowed the sound. I could still see the top of her head for a moment, then the movement swallowed even that. I did not panic yet. It was New Year's Eve after all, and people were packed so close that losing sight of someone was normal. I believed she would be waiting downstairs near the train platform. I told myself that over and over as the crowd pushed me down the stairs, each step slippery with snow and confetti. Inside the station, the air felt thick, like the walls held every echo instead of letting them go. People rushed through the doors of arriving trains, trying to escape the crush forming at the entrances. I stepped into the first car that opened, scanning the faces, searching for her bright red scarf. Nothing. Not even a glimpse. Then my phone buzzed. Just one message preview glowed on my screen in a way that didn't match the celebration at all. It said, "Someone is pulling me. Help." The words hit me like ice water down my spine. They were wrong. They did not fit the night or the way we felt earlier. Before I could step out, the doors closed in my face and the train jerked forward. Everything around me blurred, but my mind snapped into sharp focus so fast that my chest felt tight. I shoved past a couple leaning on a pole and hit the emergency intercom, my voice far too loud as I told the operator I needed to get off at the next stop. People stared, but no one spoke. They looked drained, confused, maybe scared in ways they did not want to say. When the train stopped, I burst out the doors, sprinting up the escalator 2 steps at a time, my heart hammering a wild rhythm. The fireworks above still screamed across the sky, covering up other noises like sirens or shouts that barely slipped through. When I reached the street, officers were everywhere, guiding injured people to temporary aid stations set up near the sidewalks. I heard someone mention crowd crush injuries near the square, and something inside me twisted hard. But I had to find her. I forced myself to retrace every step we had taken earlier, moving through the distorted glow of smoke, lights, and drifting confetti that made the whole city look unreal. My boots slid on the icy ground as I scanned every inch for anything familiar. A hat, a glove, a noisemaker. Something, but nothing belonged to her. My brain kept replaying the last clear image I had of her, that red scarf dragging lightly against the ground as she pushed toward the steps. When I reached the place where we had been separated, something new caught my eye, a shape on the snowy ground near a maintenance doorway built into the metro wall. The scarf lay there, half crumpled, the bright red dulled by melted snow. The metal door behind it sat slightly open, even though every local knew those doors were always locked. My breath caught. The scarf looked dropped mid-run. I crouched, picked it up, and the faint smell of her perfume lingered, mixed with something damp and metallic that felt wrong, deeply wrong. I called her again. Straight to voicemail. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe, and I stepped back as if distance would give me clarity. But the doorway seemed to pull at me, the yellow light flickering inside like a weak heartbeat. I slipped through the opening. The floor slanted downward, uneven. The air grew colder, carrying the smell of wet concrete and old dust, the kind that clings to your skin. The tunnel curved sharply, left then right, like it had been patched together over years by people who didn't care if it made sense. The noises from above disappeared completely, replaced only by my footsteps echoing in strange patterns. But they weren't alone. Every few seconds, another sound echoed behind mine, not matching my pace, not repeating in any regular way. It felt like someone ahead of me was adjusting their steps to stay out of sync, like they were trying not to be caught. I called for Talia, but the tunnel swallowed my voice, leaving only a thin sound that didn't feel like it belonged to me. The deeper I walked, the more the lights flickered, creating pulses of shadow that stretched and curled along the walls. The air felt heavy, thick enough to taste, and something sharp lingered in my nose, like rusted metal. The passage opened into a larger service room. Old equipment filled the corners. Cables were coiled across the ground like dead snakes. A utility cart lay on its side in the middle, as if someone had knocked it over while running. Behind it was a small alcove, narrow like a closet. Something moved inside it. Not big, not loud. A tiny, frightened flinch. When I stepped closer, a shape rushed out and crashed into me so hard we both slid across the dusty floor. I scrambled up, and she did too. It was Talia. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, her breath shaking. Her voice cracked as she tried to speak, but she managed only broken whispers. She kept saying someone had grabbed her wrist in the crowd and pulled her toward the doorway, guiding her with a strange confidence, like they had done it many times before. Before I could understand any of it, something in the far corner moved. A shadow, tall, still, watching. It stepped backward into darkness the moment our eyes met. It didn't run. It simply retreated with calm steps, like it knew the layout far better than we did, like it had practiced disappearing. My stomach dropped. I grabbed Talia's arm and whispered, "We need to run." She barely nodded. We took off through the tunnel, our footsteps uneven and panicked, the shadows stretching like hands trying to grab us. Every flicker of the lights felt like the moment something would appear behind us. Just before reaching the exit, I heard something, a faint knocking echoing from deeper in the tunnel, slow and steady, as if asking to be let out, or let in. I didn't look back. 2 transit officers stood at the doorway, alerted by a station worker who had seen it open on a monitor. They pulled us out fast, slamming and locking the door behind us. Talia tried to explain everything, but her voice kept breaking. Hours later, after emergency checks and endless questions, one of the officers told us something that has haunted me ever since. Security footage from the metro showed multiple people being quietly redirected toward that same locked doorway throughout the night. One person doing it, blending perfectly into the crowd, guiding people at the exact moments fireworks exploded or crowds surged, moments when no one would notice a stranger's subtle push. The police searched the tunnel. They found nothing. No person, no footprints, no sign of where the shadow had gone. But they found one strange thing. A locked room deep in the old station basement, a place no workers used anymore. Inside it, they heard knocking. Soft, slow. But when they opened the door, the room was empty, completely empty. They sealed the entire tunnel the next morning. Talia and I moved away from Winnipeg a few months later. We never attend public countdowns now. We cannot stand crowds. We cannot stand confined spaces. And we cannot forget that shadow. Sometimes, late at night, when the world feels too quiet, I take out the red scarf she dropped that night. I hold it like a reminder that she came back, even when something tried to take her away. But I still think about the knocking, the shadow, the strange confidence in those steps, the people redirected before her. And one more thing, a drunk neighbor who lived below my old apartment stopped me earlier that same night. He was staggering in the hallway, eyes unfocused, voice shaking, and he grabbed my sleeve just long enough to slur out, "Don't go home tonight, not yet, something is wrong." At the time, I laughed it off. Now I wish I had asked him what he meant, because every doorway near a station still makes my skin crawl. I don't know what waits behind those doors now. I don't think anyone does. But sometimes, when I walk past an old building or hear a distant echo in a quiet hallway, I swear I hear the soft knock again. Sometimes the world looks safe because everyone around us is laughing, celebrating, and pretending nothing bad can happen. But horror teaches us something important. Danger doesn't always shout or show itself in obvious ways. It hides in small moments we ignore, like a crowded place, a strange doorway, a message we think is a mistake, or a warning we choose to laugh off. This story reminds us that life can change in one moment. So always watch your surroundings, look after your friends, and listen to the quiet warnings that your mind tries to give you. Darkness often waits in places we walk past every day, and being alert can save you from walking straight into it. I always believed New Year's Eve brought a kind of soft magic to Mississauga, the kind that made cold streets glow brighter and made even tired people feel hopeful. My own life had been nothing special, growing up in a small apartment near Burnhamthorpe Road, raised by a single parent who worked long hours and always reminded me that quiet nights had their own stories hidden under them. Maybe that is why I became the kind of person who paid too much attention to shadows, to the way winter wind carried strange echoes between buildings. Back then, I never thought those old habits would save me or haunt me. I never thought they would pull me toward a night I would spend years trying to forget. The drive home after the fireworks had always felt like a small tradition for my family. The windows cracked open just enough to let the smell of sparklers drift out, the heater humming softly, and my niece half asleep in the back seat with one boot missing because she always kicked something off when tired. That night, though, the industrial stretch near the lakeshore felt dimmer than usual, as if the streetlights were playing a slow game of flicker and fail. I leaned forward, trying to understand the shapes we passed, while my cousin Ray joked lightly that Mississauga somehow aged 10 years every winter. We were not rushing, just rolling home after visiting relatives, carrying that warm but heavy tiredness that comes from celebrations stretching later than planned. Nothing about the moment hinted how fast everything would twist. The car carried a comfortable hush until Ray muttered something under his breath and touched the brakes. At first, I thought he saw leftover fireworks debris on the shoulder, or maybe a torn garbage bag. But as the headlights pushed deeper across the pavement, a shape grew clearer. Too still, too close to human. My chest tightened, and I leaned forward more, afraid of spotting a face. The figure lay near the gravel line, one arm folded beneath the body, and the other stretched out like someone reaching for help. The jacket they wore had an odd reflective strip, something that caught the light in a strange, uneven shimmer, not like standard work gear, more like someone had stitched it on by hand. Ray said nothing for several long seconds, his hands tightening around the wheel with the kind of calm he used only when fear tried to push its way into the car. When he eased onto the shoulder, the vehicle rolled to a stop with a slow crunch of gravel, and the eerie stillness around us grew heavier, as if everything nearby had stopped breathing for a moment. The air outside looked thick with cold, muffled like sound itself had frozen. The only movement came from the blink of our hazard lights bouncing off cracked bits of pavement. Ray told me to stay in the car while he called emergency services, but I stepped out anyway, keeping some distance behind him. The figure on the ground did not move, not even a tiny shift. Then I noticed an unsettling detail. One of their shoes lay several feet away, oddly upright, like someone had placed it there on purpose. Ray kept his voice steady as he spoke to dispatch, but the way his eyes darted around said he felt something was wrong, something larger than we could see. When the first patrol car arrived, the officer barely needed to look before telling us to step back. He walked along the shoulder with his flashlight angled low, sweeping carefully as if expecting the ground to whisper secrets. It did not take long for him to find tire marks. Deep, curved impressions carved into the gravel, crossing the shoulder in a pattern that made no sense for an accident. Another officer arrived, then another, and soon they moved with that clipped sharpness people carry when they realize chance had nothing to do with what they were seeing. One of them asked if we heard anything earlier, an engine rev, a shout, anything. But the night had been quiet except for the last faint pops of fireworks drifting far across town. When they told us the scene appeared intentional, the weight of it hit me so suddenly my stomach dropped. The surrounding neighborhood began waking up as word spread that police were investigating something serious. People stepped outside wearing New Year hats and thin jackets pulled over pajamas, some holding half-finished glasses of champagne. A woman with a long scarlet scarf pointed down the street, telling an officer she heard a truck speeding past just after midnight. She said the engine sounded strained, like someone pushed it harder than it could handle. Another neighbor, an older man leaning heavily on a cane, recalled headlights swerving near the stop sign before vanishing into darkness. Officers wrote everything down, their faces tightening as the stories began lining up. While they took statements, a detective approached us. Tall, narrow-faced, hair tied back so tightly it barely moved in the wind. He paused before speaking, like he filtered each sentence in his mind first. He asked for details about what we saw, about the shoe lying away from the body, about how long we had been pulled over. Ray answered most of it, but the detective kept studying me, almost as if comparing two versions of the same scene. I told him everything I remembered, the stillness, the strange reflective jacket, the lack of skid marks where a scared driver might have tried braking. He nodded slowly until a sharp radio call made him stiffen. Then he walked away quickly without explanation. Moments later, something shifted among the officers, a sudden ripple of urgency, like air crackling before a storm. More patrol cars arrived. The detective returned with clipped steps, speaking faster now. A missing person alert had just come in from a town about an hour away. The description matched the figure lying by the shoulder. According to the report, the person had been involved in a bar fight earlier that night, one that escalated violently. Someone stormed out afterward, swearing they were not finished, and witnesses reported a beat-up pickup truck with a dented passenger door speeding away. Hearing that made the scene tilt into something heavier, darker. The bits of information the neighbors offered suddenly aligned. The older man with the cane insisted the truck he saw was lifted unusually high, with mismatched headlights, one bright white, the other a weak yellow. The woman with the red scarf added she noticed a long scrape down the passenger side as it tore past, briefly illuminated by leftover fireworks smoke drifting across the air. The detectives traded looks with the grim recognition of people who realized the tragedy laid out before them was no accident. Someone had chased that victim with intention, using this dim industrial road as their stage. As officers paced, measuring, marking, and collecting, I kept replaying the moment we first saw the figure lying there. Fireworks had faded. The air felt hollow. Police radios crackled softly, their hum growing sharper each time the wind shifted. Ray leaned against the car, rubbing his jaw, staring at the deep tire impressions as if trying to force them to rearrange and reveal the truth. Even though we did not know the victim, a heavy dread settled over us, clinging like cold mist. It felt as if the road itself held the memory of what happened and refused to let it fade. Paramedics prepared to move the victim, and the detective motioned for us to step aside again. He told us they found fragments of blue paint embedded in the gravel, matching the truck witnesses described. He also said they spotted fresh footprints near the grassy edge, scattered and uneven, showing that the victim tried to flee before collapsing. Something about the way he said it tightened my chest again. The realization that the victim likely saw the truck barreling toward them and still ran for their life. We agreed to give statements at the station later that week. It felt like something we owed the person, more than an obligation. When Ray and I finally drove home, silence filled the car, except the heater clicking as it struggled to warm the freezing air. Usually that warmth felt comforting. That night it felt wrong, like it did not match the heaviness inside us. At the last intersection before home, I caught myself studying each set of headlights, searching for mismatched beams or lifted frames. The habit stuck with me for weeks. Even my niece, though she slept through most of it, sensed the tension the next morning. She asked why everyone felt quiet, but Ray and I just exchanged looks, unsure how to explain something that barely made sense to us. Days later, detectives called again. They found the truck abandoned behind an old storage facility 2 towns over. The driver had escaped on foot, leaving behind fingerprints and a cracked phone still logged into social media. By the end of the week, they arrested a suspect, someone known for violent outbursts when drunk, someone who left the bar swearing the fight was not over. Relief mixed strangely with unease. Yes, the person would hurt no one else, but knowing the reason behind the attack did not erase the image of that quiet roadside, or the strange jacket strip, or the lonely shoe standing upright like a silent witness. I thought the worst was over. I thought the nights would slowly feel normal again. I was wrong. Something followed me from that road, something that fed on silence and used the winter nights to whisper through cracks I did not know I had. 2 nights after giving our statements, I got a New Year message on my phone at 2:17 a.m. The sender ID flashed a name that made my stomach freeze. It was my father's name. He had been gone for years. The message said, "Happy New Year, kiddo, I'm home." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. I told myself it was a scam call, a reused number, anything but what it looked like. Still, the chill did not leave. The next day, something strange happened in my building. I was riding the elevator to my floor when it lurched suddenly and stopped between levels. The lights dimmed, then flickered. A woman inside with me began breathing fast, then shaking, then banging on the door with growing panic. The elevator walls seemed to pulse with her fear, and her cries echoed too loudly in the tight space. When the lights flicked back fully, the elevator resumed moving, but her terror lingered in the stale air like something alive. That same evening, while unlocking my door, a man I had never seen before walked past me in the hallway. Without slowing, he said, "Your apartment always looked warm from the outside. Enjoy your night in number 17. I froze. I never told him my unit number. The building had over 20 floors. Before I could ask anything, he rounded the corner and vanished. Every night that followed felt stretched thin, as if the world around me had become a fragile screen someone kept tapping from the other side. I could not shake the memory of the figure on the road, or the shoe, or the strange stitch strip glowing in our headlights. I kept wondering who stitched it, why it looked handmade, why it reflected unevenly, why the shoe was placed upright, why the footprints looked scattered, like running and collapsing and rising again. I wondered what chased them after leaving the bar. I wondered if the fear they felt seeped into the road like cold water sinking into concrete. I wondered if that fear followed me home. One night, while lying awake, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, uneven, dragging lightly. They stopped right outside my door. I held my breath. Something brushed the bottom of the door like fingers tracing the wood. Then silence. No one walked away. No elevator dinged. The hall stayed still. When I finally peeked through the peephole, The corridor was empty. I told myself stress was playing tricks on me. But a part of me knew the truth deep in my bones. That night on the road had not ended. Something from that moment clung to me, curled into my life like smoke that refused to fade. And on New Year's Eve every year since, when the celebrations calm and the fireworks fade and the streets fall quiet, I find myself staring at the door, listening for the soft scrape of footsteps, waiting for the voice that might whisper from the other side, waiting for a message from a dead number, waiting for the flicker of a mismatched beam drifting along the hallway, waiting for the fear that never left that cold Mississauga road. I was not expecting the night to follow me home, yet I still felt watched. I wish I had turned back before everything shifted. I grew up in Brampton, a city that always felt loud and restless, and I carried that restless feeling into adulthood. My name is Rayon, and before that New Year's Eve, nothing about my life felt dangerous or strange. I worked at a small social media agency, barely keeping up with deadlines, trying to hold together a relationship that felt like it was slipping through my fingers, and hoping the new year would somehow reset everything for me. I was exhausted, stretched thin, and all I wanted was one peaceful night. Instead, I walked into the worst night of my life. My friend Cade convinced me to go to a house party in a neighborhood near Beaufort Drive. The place belonged to someone I barely knew, a guy from his workplace. The house was buzzing with noise, packed with people holding cheap drinks, leaning on walls, shouting over different playlists blasting from different rooms. I remember the strange decorations, thrift store frames mixed with fake candles that flickered too bright. The whole space felt like it was trying too hard to look alive. I had been standing near a warm doorway, trying to breathe and cool off, when a woman approached me. She did not drift toward me like a stranger. She moved like she had chosen me before I even arrived. She had sharp, restless eyes that didn't blink enough, and a habit of tapping her thumb against her finger like she was counting down to something. She asked my name, then asked if I wanted to go somewhere quieter. I tried to be polite when I told her I was not interested, but she leaned in close anyway, whispered something I could not understand, then turned around so sharply it felt rehearsed. As she vanished into the crowd, a cold pressure settled in my chest. I felt as if I had broken a rule I never knew existed. The night seemed normal after that. Nothing strange, nothing alarming. I went home after midnight, collapsed on the couch in my jacket, and fell asleep. At 7:43 a.m., my phone started vibrating nonstop. At first, I thought it was Cade sending blurry selfies, but instead it was message after message from friends asking what I had done. Some were angry, some were confused. One simply wrote, "Explain now." My stomach tightened as I clicked a link someone sent me. It opened a brand new social media profile with a grainy picture of me from years ago. Under it was a long post accusing me of hurting a woman at the New Year's Eve party. No details, no name. Just a vague accusation shaped perfectly to let imaginations do the rest. The post spread fast, faster than I thought possible. I watched old classmates, neighbors, even strangers join in, typing judgments from behind their screens. My girlfriend didn't answer my calls. My boss left a voicemail saying we needed to talk. The worst part was how accurate the fake posts felt. Whoever wrote them knew details about the night. Small things like the color of my jacket, the drink I held, even where I had been standing. None of it proved anything, but it made the lie believable. I called people who knew me well, hoping someone would listen long enough to help, but most conversations ended before they started. One old friend messaged me saying, "This looks really bad," and then vanished. Even Cade hesitated when I reached him. He said he hadn't seen anything happen, but mentioned that someone claimed a woman had left the house crying. Nothing matched what I remembered, yet the rumor wrote itself without me. By noon, someone had taken screenshots of the fake profile and posted them in a community group tied to my workplace. Coworkers commented that they hoped the company would take proper action. When I tried logging into my work email, I saw my access had been suspended. That moment hit me like a cold wave. Whoever made the post didn't just want to embarrass me. They wanted to isolate me, strip away my ability to defend myself, and bury me under suspicion before I even had the chance to speak. and the only strange person I spoke to at the party was the woman with the tapping fingers. I drove back to the house. When I knocked, the host, a guy named Reese, opened the door looking tired and confused. He let me inside reluctantly. I explained everything, watching his face go from curious to uncomfortable. When I described the woman, he frowned and shook his head. He said he didn't recall anyone like that, no sharp eyes, no tapping hands, nothing. He said some guests mentioned seeing someone crying near the bathroom, but descriptions didn't match. One person said she wore a dark jacket. Another swore it was pale. Someone claimed she had short hair. Another insisted she had a long braid. It felt like 4 different women blended into one shifting shape. As I left, I called Kate again and asked him to meet me at a quiet coffee shop near the river. He arrived looking uneasy. When I mentioned how nobody could describe her clearly, he whispered something that stayed in my mind like a cold breath. It's like she wanted to be seen but not really remembered. His words crawled under my skin. On my way home, I checked the fake profile again. A new post appeared, pinned to the top. It claimed I had threatened the woman when she tried to get help. They added a fake timestamp that placed the argument at the exact moment I had been outside with Kate. A blurry photo of the back of my jacket was attached, taken from an angle I didn't recognize. Someone had been close enough to watch me, close enough to photograph me without me feeling anything. As night fell, I called my brother hoping for support. He spoke carefully, too carefully. He believed me, he said, but someone had messaged him anonymously before I called. They told him to distance himself from me for everyone's safety. I hung up feeling the walls around me tighten. It wasn't fear yet, but something colder, something deeper, something like being hunted. That night, I barely slept. I sat on the couch with all the lights on, refreshing the fake profile over and over. At 2:30 a.m., a comment appeared under one of the posts. Someone tagged another account and wrote, "Isn't this what you warned us about?" I clicked the commenter's profile and scrolled through old posts until I found a picture from the New Year's party. In the corner, near a stack of red cups, stood the woman. Same stillness, same tapping fingers, same intense stare. The picture was taken hours before she approached me, yet her expression hadn't changed at all, like her face was wearing a mask she didn't know how to remove. Beside her stood someone I recognized, Reese, laughing at something out of frame. The next morning I returned to his house without warning. He opened the door faster this time, almost expecting me. When I showed him the picture, the color drained from his face. He admitted he remembered that moment. Then, he confessed something he hadn't said before. She didn't come alone. She arrived with a former co-worker of his, a man I had met once years ago. Someone I barely remembered. Someone who had left the party early without saying goodbye. I searched the co-worker's old posts. His words were filled with bitterness, complaints about people getting away with things, rants about being overlooked, hints of grudges he carried like stones in his pockets. It wasn't proof, but it made the scattered pieces lock together into something terrifying. I messaged him directly, outlining everything I had pieced together. He never responded, but within an hour, the fake profile vanished. The reposts disappeared. My work access was restored the next day. My girlfriend came over in the evening, acting relieved but distant. The storm faded as quickly as it came, leaving behind a cold silence, no apologies. No explanations, no closure. But the horror did not end with the lies disappearing, because the woman never did. A week later, I heard police sirens outside my window late at night. Everything went silent in my neighborhood, even though nothing had happened. I stepped toward the window and saw shadows moving on the street, too slow to be normal. 2 nights after that, someone tried to force their way into my house, rattling the doorknob hard enough to bend metal. When I shouted, the sound stopped instantly, as if the person pressed their ear to the door to listen to my fear. Days later, my friend Jaden came over for a late chat. He stepped outside for air around 11:21 p.m. He never walked back in. I found his drink sitting untouched near the railing. His phone lay on the ground, the screen glowing with an unfinished message. His last words typed on the screen were, "I think she is here." The police searched, but they found nothing. Now, every New Year's Eve, I scan every room, every doorway, every shadow. I watch for tapping fingers. I listen for footsteps that don't belong. I learned too late that some people don't want revenge, or justice, or attention. Some just want to erase who you are, one piece at a time, until you barely recognize the reflection staring back at you. And sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones who walk through crowds unnoticed, leaving behind only broken lives and blurry memories. Silence from others can be more painful than the accusation itself. When those who claim to care choose distance instead of support, you learn who truly stands beside you when your world cracks apart. I never thought the last night of the year would break me in ways I still cannot explain. Yet every time I close my eyes, I fall back into that frozen hour where my mind slipped between what was real and what should never exist. I grew up far from here, in the dry heat of Tucson, where winter barely touched us, and where the sky stayed open and warm even when the calendar said it was cold. My parents worked hard, my mom running a home decor shop and my dad working as an online systems analyst, and somehow we always made time for each other. I was a quiet kid, always more into sports than makeup, drifting between volleyball and track, never sure of where I belonged, but certain that moving my body felt better than sitting still. My dad loved that about me, always cheering from the sidelines with a grin that made me want to push harder. My mom and I got close in different ways, going for haircuts and warm pastries on weekends, sometimes spending whole afternoons wandering stores because she said walking beside me helped her feel young again. We had our own rhythms, our own small world. Everything loosened the year I turned 17, when my dad kept hinting we might move north, someplace new, someplace calmer, someplace where life moved differently. I didn't have many friends, and my breakup with my boyfriend a month earlier left me floating, unsure of anything, so I told them I didn't care where we went. I meant it. A new place sounded like a clean page. They spent months looking at areas across Canada, and soon my dad became obsessed with Hamilton, saying it had energy but also quiet corners, that it sat right by the water, and that its winters felt real. I didn't mind. I thought maybe I needed cold nights to remind me life wasn't stuck in one season. By December, everything felt set. They wanted a break before the move became official, so they took a long weekend to drive and look at houses. For the first time in my life, I had our new rental home in Hamilton all to myself. It didn't feel scary, just strange, like the walls were still getting used to us. Snow piled in thick sheets over the lawns, glittering under streetlights, and fireworks stands had already popped up downtown even though New Year's Eve wasn't until tomorrow. It was the 30th when they left, just before noon, and the stillness that followed them out the door made the house feel wide and hollow. I went into the city later, grabbed some clothes, a warm jacket, and some pastries, then came back around 5:42 p.m., the sky already dark because Canadian winter swallowed daylight too fast. Since I'd eaten downtown, I dropped my bags inside and walked toward the small indoor pool that came with the rental. Steam rose softly off the warm water, and after changing, I floated on my back, letting the hum of the heater echo around the room. I didn't stay long because I heard my phone buzzing near the towels. It was my dad. He reminded me it was the night before New Year's, and tomorrow I would need to handle the door for neighbors and their kids who liked to pass by exchanging cheerful treats and small notes. He told me there should be treats in the cupboard above the fridge and small glowing lanterns packed in the garage for decoration. My mom also wanted me to put a silver light-up snowflake outside by the walkway. I told him not to worry. I joked that I'd handle all the mini snow monsters that came to the door. He laughed. Then the call ended. I got dressed, brushed out my hair, and found the small face paint kit I used years ago for a winter play at school. I painted my face pale, added shadowy lines, soft cracks, icy marks, trying to make myself look like a frozen statue come to life. After that, I heated a small dinner, ate quickly, then remembered the snowflake lantern my dad mentioned. I had to place it outside. The garage was cold, the air sharp and metallic, and the shelves were stacked with boxes we still hadn't opened. I searched for a long time, and just when irritation crept in, I spotted the lantern sitting on top of a tall metal shelf. I dragged a wooden crate over, stepped up, stretched, but even then I barely touched it. I pushed onto my toes, leaning enough to grab it, and the moment my fingers closed around the metal frame, the crate shifted beneath me. I didn't even have time to gasp. I fell sideways, hit the cold concrete, and a loud crack filled my ears. I don't know if it was the floor or my head, but everything went soundless. Then black. When I opened my eyes again, I was still on the ground, my cheek against the freezing cement, and a dull pounding filled my skull. My vision swayed, and I pushed myself upright slowly, gripping the shelf for balance. My watch said I had been out for almost 28 minutes, and something cold slithered through my chest. I blinked until the room steadied. Then I heard it, the low hum of voices outside, muffled cheering, and fireworks bursting somewhere too close. That worried me. Fireworks were banned in this area except at the harbor, yet these sounded like they were being fired near the old industrial lots behind our street, the kind of area people usually avoided. The doorbell rang, cheerful and loud, snapping me back. I stepped inside the kitchen, grabbed the bags of treats my mom left, and walked to the door. When I opened it, 4 kids stood on the snowy walkway. 3 boys in ghost masks, and a girl dressed as some kind of winter creature with glowing white paint on her cheeks. One boy said he liked how I added real frost streaks around my eyes. I frowned because I didn't use anything that looked like frost. When I touched my face, my fingertips came away with something darker. It didn't look like makeup. I didn't want to think about it. I handed them treats. They wished me a good night and ran off into the snow. I placed the extra bags by the table near the door and went to lie down in the living room, pulling a soft blanket over me as my head throbbed. I just wanted to rest for a moment. My eyes drifted closed as sounds outside faded. A heavy knock snapped me awake. I sat up fast, heart thudding. The room was dim. My phone screen said 9 p.m., or spoken as 9 o'clock p.m., which meant I had been asleep for an hour. The knocking came again, louder, 3 slow strikes that echoed down the hall. I stood and walked toward the door, and as I moved, a cold draft seemed to slip under the frame, weaving around my ankles like icy fingers. The closer I got, the worse the feeling became, my skin prickling, my breathing turning shallow. I pressed my eye to the peephole. Someone tall stood there in a black coat that reached to the ground, a hood pulled so low their face vanished completely. For a second, I thought maybe some teenager was trying to be dramatic, but the shape was too still, too straight, too silent. I stepped back. I didn't want to open the door. I turned around, but my body didn't listen. My right hand moved, slow and stiff like someone else pushed it. It unlocked the door, then it pushed it open. Air rushed inside, cold and sharp, carrying a foul scent like wet iron and old soil. I tried to speak, but only a faint sound left my throat. My vision wavered. I felt weightless and pinned at the same time, as if trapped in a nightmare where every limb belonged to someone else. I couldn't move, couldn't blink. The figure stood only a few feet away, towering above me, the coat swaying slightly even though the air was still. My mind kept whispering that this wasn't real, that none of it made sense, but fear surged so deep it felt like it swallowed my heartbeat. Then everything dissolved again. Darkness pressed in until I floated inside it. I don't remember falling. I don't remember breathing. When light returned, I was on the couch, my mom leaning over me with worry carved deep into her face and my dad holding an ice pack to my temple. They kept calling my name. I tried to speak, but my mouth felt heavy. They said when they came home, they found me unconscious with the front door wide open and cold air pouring into the house. They wrapped my head, helped me into their car, and drove straight to the hospital, where a scan showed a severe concussion but no bleeding. I kept telling myself it was a dream, that the tall figure was just my mind breaking under the hit I took. But even now, I'm not sure. The doctor said hallucinations can happen with concussions, especially if you fall hard enough. He told me not to worry. He said it was normal. But he wasn't there when I woke in the night after coming home, hearing distant fireworks that shouldn't have been fired near our neighborhood, seeing flashes of color glowing above the abandoned factories where nobody was supposed to be. He didn't see the coat on the floor by the garage door, a coat I didn't remember owning, a coat I found at a friend's New Year party last year with keys and an address stitched inside, an address that pointed to an old shut-down building fenced off from the public. I never told anyone. I kept it out of curiosity. He also wasn't there when I heard footsteps outside our window hours before sunrise, slow and dragging, like someone pacing the yard. Sometimes I think the fall opened a door in my mind. Sometimes I think I dragged something back with me. Because when I checked the garage the next morning, the crate I fell from wasn't where I left it. The lantern I tried to grab was sitting neatly beside the door, and a trail of snowy footprints, long and narrow, stretched from the garage entry to the back steps even though it hadn't snowed all night. Now I walk through this house and feel watched by corners that used to mean nothing. I hear things that vanish when I turn. I dream of tall shadows following me from crowded bars downtown, footsteps that stop when I stop, breathing that isn't mine brushing my neck. I keep replaying the moment my hand unlocked the door, the way my fingers moved without me. Every instinct tells me something waited for that door to open. I'm supposed to feel safe because my parents are here, but sometimes the silence between us feels thin, ready to tear if I push too hard. Something in me changed that night. Or something outside changed me. New Year's Eve is tonight, and fireworks will light the whole harbor, but I can't shake the dread that the colors will flash over the industrial lots again, that the figure will stand beneath them waiting for me to follow the stitched address on those keys, waiting for me to understand why it knocked 3 times like it was asking for entry. I try to tell myself it was only the concussion, only fear, only imagination, but sometimes, when I move through the house at night, I see my reflection in the dark windows, and for a moment, I swear it doesn't move the same way I do. The story teaches that when you ignore your injuries, your fears, or the warning signs around you, you can lose control of your safety and your reality. Taking care of yourself, asking for help, and staying aware of your surroundings are important, especially when you feel vulnerable. Sometimes, danger doesn't arrive suddenly, it slowly appears when you feel alone, distracted, or unprotected. Trust your instincts, value your health, and remember that one careless moment can open the door to something you didn't expect.